Many Magic the Gathering players ask the question, how do I start playing Standard? Standard is a 60-card constructed format for Magic the Gathering, whose card pool is made up of the most recent primary expansion sets. Once a year, with the release of the fall set, the sets from 2 years ago rotate out of the format to make way for the upcoming year of new releases. And the barrier to entry is typically much lower than in Magic's non-rotating formats. In fact, due to the small pool of legal cards, the barrier to entry is lower than any other Magic format except Pauper, and that includes, by the way, Commander. Standard is also the most common constructed format for most local game stores' Friday night Magic events. If you've got a local game store near you, chances are that they have a Standard event that you can play in. These events tend to be welcoming environments for players new to Standard and even new to Magic the Gathering. In this video, I will cover how to build a Standard deck, how to find a local Standard tournament, and what to expect when you get there. I'll also get into a brief description of some of the more advanced decks in the Standard meta, as well as where to find more information if you decide you want to dig deeper into the format. Let's begin with Step 1. What to play. The first thing you're going to need in order to play Standard is a deck. Standard decks are made up of 60 cards as well as a sideboard of 15 cards. Apart from basic lands, which you may play any number of, Standard decks may contain no more than 4 copies of a single card. The cards in your deck must come from the pool of legal Standard sets. So how do you know what's legal in Standard, you might ask? Standard legality is comprised of sets from the previous 2 years of Magic the Gathering, with rotation happening once per year with the release of the new fall set. Currently, the sets legal in Standard are every primary expansion set from Innistrad Midnight Hunt to present. Note that supplemental sets such as Baldur's Gate and Jumpstart 2022, as well as reprint sets such as Dominaria Remastered or Double Masters, are not legal in Standard. For a fast, easy, and up-to-date list of the legal sets in Standard, you can always reference what'sinstandard.com. But just knowing what's legal in Standard is not enough to build a Standard deck. How do you begin, and what deck does one begin with? There are a number of methods for determining which Standard deck you'd like to construct. Perhaps you already own a key card for Standard that you got from a booster pack you opened, a draft you played in, or a Commander deck you've built, and you want to build around that. Maybe you don't own any Standard cards, but you have a favorite color pair. Or maybe you just want to play what's strongest, or you'd prefer to brew your own Standard deck. If you don't know where to start, the current deck recommended by Tolarian Community College is Mono Blue Tempo. This deck is cheap, easy to learn, and a ton of fun to play. The goal of the deck is to keep your opponent off balance long enough to cross the finish line with big serpents and flying creatures. Bounce their creatures, counter their best spells, and keep your hand stocked with more interaction thanks to the powerful card draw spells, Thirst for Discovery, and Flow of Knowledge. Best of all, this deck will run you less than $40, and $10 of that is simply the playset of Haughty Djinn, the deck's premier threat. Haughty Djinn is not just a big evasive creature, it also makes your instants and sorceries cheaper. If you cast a Haughty Djinn with 1 extra mana up, you'll be able to back it up with counter magic such as Make Disappear, and protection spells such as Slip Out the Back. This deck would provide an excellent introduction into the Standard format for any newcomer. It's good enough to go toe-to-toe with the other best decks in the format, and the financial investment is minimal. Best of all, the core threat base of the deck, Haughty Djinn and the aptly named Tolarian Terror, were printed in Dominaria United just this past fall. That means the deck's foundation will still be legal even after the next rotation in September of 2023. But maybe you're looking for something a little more advanced, or you want to pave your own path into Standard. If that's the case, I recommend checking out the site MTG Goldfish for a list of the most popular decks in Standard. This will not only provide you with inspiration for what deck you might want to play, but will also prepare you for what you might face at your first Standard event. The metagame breakdown page on MTG Goldfish lays out every Standard deck with any published results, including published results from Magic's online clients, which means it is a very accurate overview of the meta. what decks are winning and what decks you are likely to face. Even if you already know what standard deck you want to play, spend some time looking at the different decks on there. It'll help you see some trends for how decks are constructed and give you a good idea of what your opponents might be running. In the current standard meta, many decks tend to be built around one or both of the powerful 3-mana double-faced enchantments printed last year, Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Wedding Announcement. Both of these cards are strong, snowballing threats in their own right that can both buff your other creatures and take over the game on their own. As such, Standard has a few different versions of similar mid-range decks with their own strengths and weaknesses. The most common versions are Grixis, Esper, Mardu, and Mono White. The gameplay these mid-range decks offer is fun, intricate, and diverse from game to game, but they do tend to be the most expensive archetypes you'll come across in Standard due to their reliance on a few key expensive cards that are great in Eternal formats, such as the aforementioned enchantments and Sheoldred the Apocalypse. The cheapest mid-range deck, Mono White Midrange, is still around $225, while all the various multicolor decks can get upwards of $400. Another up-and-coming Standard deck is the Azurius Soldiers deck. This is an aggressive deck built around the Soldier's creature type, and specifically the dual land from Brothers War Fortified Beachhead, one of the strongest dual lands we've seen printed in Standard in quite some time. Provided, of course, you have a lot of soldiers in your deck, which this one does. This deck is also on the cheaper side of Standard decks, coming in at around $120 for the fully optimized version. Now, a recent addition to the Standard format is a bit of a unique deck. An Izzet artifact-based ramp deck that casts the giant artifacts Cityscape Leveler and Skitter Beam Battalion ahead of schedule using accelerants such as Stern Lesson and the Mightstone and Weakstone. This is a very exciting deck both in gameplay and because it brings something to the Izzet color pair that Standard rarely gets. Now, these are just a few decks that the Standard format has to offer, but part of the joy of Standard is that the meta is always changing. As new sets enter the format and as world-class players explore the format and push the boundaries of the format, the metagame changes and evolves, keeping things interesting, new, and fun to play. What's more, at the local game store level, there's much less pressure or incentive to play a top-tier deck. Players bring decks of a wide range of power levels and often will bring their own inventive brews full of cool and under-the-radar card synergies and interactions. In a sense, Standard is a sandbox. Wizards of the Coast has printed a stack of game pieces that they've determined are fun and interesting, and players get to put those game pieces together however they wish. Whether you're a brewer, a casual player, or you've got a competitive streak, Standard will have something for you. Step 2. Finding cards. Once you know what deck you want to play, the next step will be acquiring cards for the deck. The best place to buy cards is at your local game store. Most will have a stocked selection of cards from recent Standard sets available to peruse. By buying cards from your local game store, you help fund Magic in your community, which in turn makes it easier to buy cards and play the game we love. Most local game stores do not profit off of running events, where your entry fee is usually put entirely back into the prize pool, nor much from sealed product. While of course it differs from store to store, one of the most important ways a store makes money is off of selling singles, which is why I always say to try and buy your singles from your local game store first. If your local game store does not have the singles you are looking for or does not have them at a reasonable price, many local game stores across the nation sell their singles on online marketplaces. Card Kingdom, sponsor of this channel, actually has 3 local game stores in the Pacific Northwest. Mox Boarding House in Portland, which is my local game store, as well as Mox Boarding House in Ballard and Bellevue in the Seattle area. If you're not in those areas, you can support Mox Boarding House and this channel by checking out our affiliate link at cardkingdom.com/TCC. But again, I recommend doing this only after you have checked with your own local game store first. I highly recommend that you do not crack packs looking for specific cards to build a deck with. This is not the best use of your money, especially for Standard. I feel always that you should determine what cards you want to play and buy singles. However, that isn't the only way to acquire cards. If you are playing Magic the Gathering, then you're doing it right, and there are ways to play Magic the Gathering through cracking packs, thus getting in games, potentially winning prizes, and still acquiring cards to build decks with. The main ways to do this at your local game store are through pre-release and draft events. When a new set drops, so too do new cards for Standard. Keep an eye out during preview season for cards that will make your chosen Standard deck better, or for cards that might lead you to move your deck in a different direction, or even build an entirely new Standard deck. Pre-releases are a great way to get a head start on your collection of Standard cards for a new set. And best of all, at pre-release you are cracking packs not just to get specific cards, but for the purposes of building a sealed deck to actually play Magic the Gathering with. The upcoming pre-release of Phyrexia All Will Be One is just a few weeks away. You should check with your local game store about pre-registering to attend at least one pre-release event. Pre-release events are something Tolarian Community College has always deemed worth it, and they are perfect for players of all levels, new and returning, casual and experienced. But pre-release isn't the only time you can go down to play Magic and acquire cards for your Standard deck. Drafting is another great method for getting cards from a new set. Show up to a couple draft nights and keep an eye out for the cards you need as they go around the table. Now, it's generally not the best practice to train wreck your draft, let alone your neighbor's drafts, by just taking a sweet rare that doesn't actually fit into your draft deck, but, well, it's been known to happen. What's much more likely to happen is that you will sit down, draft, play Magic the Gathering, and then afterwards look to trade your cards, either with other players or into the store for credit, for the cards you actually need for Standard. Again, these systems are what Tolarian Community College loves because they both start and end with you playing Magic the Gathering with the cards you crack from your packs. The nice thing about Standard is the majority of decks are cheaper than a similar deck would be in other constructed formats not named Pauper. And oftentimes, the most expensive cards you are buying are expensive because they see play in other formats too. Cards like Triomes will be staples in Commander, Pioneer, and Modern forever. And most of the expensive non-land cards are at the very least going to be good in Pioneer. So while yes, those Sheoldreds you picked up for your Standard Grixis deck were extremely expensive, they are likely going to retain that value and can be repurposed for a Pioneer Rakdos mid-range deck down the line, or just traded to someone who plays that deck for new cards that you want to play. Also worth noting, to the end of each Standard year, Wizards of the Coast releases a product known as Standard Challenger decks. These are great entry points for new players, as the decks are designed to be ready to play out of the box, and even come complete with a 15-card sideboard. Obviously, some decks are better than others, and some years vary, which is why you can always check out my channel's review of Challenger decks to get an idea of which ones are the best to pick up. Unfortunately, the timing for these Challenger decks' release tends to be when many of the cards in them have only a few more months left before they rotate out. Nonetheless, these decks are usually great value and an easy way to jump into the format. You can also upgrade them depending on the deck. While they aren't the perfect solution, they are a good point to look at for any Magic the Gathering player saying, I want to begin in Standard but don't know where to start. Step 3. Where to play. The best way to find Standard tournaments in your area is through the event locator feature on the Wizards of the Coast website. Go to locator.wizards.com, type in your address in the search bar, and click Search. You'll see a list of all events in your immediate vicinity. From there, you can refine your search by distance, date, and even filter your results for event type, format, and whether a store is a Wizards Play Network premium store. You can also go directly to the website of your local game store and check out their events schedule there, or just ask the staff at the store the next time you're shopping for cards. Local Standard events tend to cost between $10 and $15 depending on your area. Most of these events will be 4 rounds of what's known as a Swiss tournament structure. Each round, you'll get paired against another player with a similar record to you. You will then play a best-of-3 match with your Standard deck against their Standard deck, and once there's a winner, you'll record the result and move on to the next round. That entry fee, as I said, usually goes into offering prize support based on your record. And many stores even have a minimum prize of a pack or 2, even for those players who didn't pick up a single match win. That way, there's a reward just for playing. Standard events at your local game store should be a friendly and welcoming space for you to start experiencing the format. If you have questions about anything relating to the event, to the format, or just to your or your opponent's deck, there will be folks on staff staff who can assist. Every event at a local game store should have a judge present whose job it is to answer your questions and keep the tournament running smoothly. Don't be afraid to call a judge. That's what they're there for. If you find yourself really enjoying Standard and you want to play more than your local game store can offer, or you don't have a local game store, or you simply want to play from home, you can always play Standard whenever you want on both of Magic the Gathering's online platforms, Magic Arena and Magic Online. Unfortunately, your paper Standard collection isn't transferable online, but you can build a collection on Arena just by playing. And Magic Online does have the ability for you to transfer your digital cards into paper copies, but that is a whole other video. Suffice it to say that these two digital options means that anyone, anywhere, can play and enjoy Standard, whether they have a local game store or not. And that's all there is to it. You can now begin playing Standard immediately. Standard is a fun, ever-changing environment that's affordable and accessible to new players. Getting started is simple once you know what you're doing. If you've been thinking about giving Standard a shot, then go for it. Your local Standard event is waiting for you. Looking for a format that doesn't rotate? No problem. We've got you covered with our guides to Modern and Pioneer here, as well as a guide to Draft if you are hoping to go down to your local game store. Links to all of these videos in this video's description, and I hope very much that this video has been of some help to you. You can help me out greatly, well, just by watching those other videos and by sharing those other videos with a friend, by hitting the subscribe button if you are not currently subscribed, or just by leaving a comment. What's your favorite format to play and why? Let me know in the comments below.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
I have given $50 to build a deck with, including Commander.
I've brought Safara Sky's Blade.
I'm playing Hidetsugu, the Varying Chaos.
I'm playing Gorex, the Tomb Shell.
My deck costs only $30. What do you folks say? We shuffle up and play. I will tap for mana and play an Assault Suit.
Yeah. Oh. How come you know so much about Command? Oh, right.
Play Knight Incarnate, but I'm gonna do its port Invoke.
Ooh. Knight Incarnate.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do.
How do you feel about lethality?
How would it be more to feel about lethality?